right. Hello. Welcome back on whatever episode number we're on. Yeah, I totally remember. I'm good at my job. Actually, so good that I've done so many episodes that I've lost count. So, we take that, I guess. Anyway, let's let's get started here. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you do?
Hi, I am SuperViperT302. If that name sounds like a mouthful, you can just call me Viper. Um, I actually want to clear up. I'm going to start by clearing up something that a lot of people tend to. It's a little bit of a misconception, but a lot of people call me Super Viper T, but it's actually there's the three segments to the username are supposed to be Super Viper T302.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there for everybody who's ever been confused by that. So that should clear it all up. So how I would describe my brand is, or my brand, so to speak, is I speedrun certain 3D Mario games. Um, there is one Pac-Man game that I speedrun. Um, and then I also play a lot of Gradius. I play a lot of old Namco arcade games, and the most recent addition to my brand being Rhythm Heaven.
Hmm.
So that's mostly what I do, and occasionally other stuff, but those are like my main focuses.
Definitely very different things, but
I'm sort of a jack of all trades kind of person.
fair enough. Well, I guess we can dive in then. Um, the first question, of course, being how did you get started in speedrunning?
Oh gosh, there's layers to this
Mm.
story.
Oh
so
boy.
um, um so I'll kind of go ahead and skip to sort of the main catalyst. So I first got introduced to Super Mario 64 through Fleshjerta's like old blooper videos, like those old like Project 64 blooper videos that people would record. Like
Never seen one.
think think old style SMG4, and
Mm.
that's kind of what it is. I just randomly stumbled across them. I never really been much of a Mario fan prior to that,
Mm.
and so I found those videos funny, watched them, and then eventually I came across a video that um, showcased a bunch of glitches in SM64. And glitches in video games, I'd say, have always fascinated me. I'll probably dive more into that later, but so I was and that video, I don't remember who uploaded it, but it included a bunch of things like getting on top of the castle in without the cannon, the Black Room of Death. It had a very brief introduction to cloning before people knew what cloning was.
Oh.
Um,
Hmm.
there was beating Koopa the Quick in 0 seconds, and then there were the glitches that were required for a 16-star run, which were Mips Clip and reverse long jumps.
They did not call it reverse long jumps. Oh no.
Hey, I'm pretty that if that's not the exact terminology, that's very close to it.
Hmm.
But so that was kind of interesting to me, and it just so happened that a friend of mine who actually lived around the corner from me at the time actually had an N64 with a copy of the game. So eventually I looked up more videos of the game, like the World of Long Plays 120-star video, and eventually I came across the Super Mario 64 versus with Attacking Toucans and Josh Jepson, and that was a decent amount of entertainment for me. So eventually I would try the game out at my friend's place, and we kind of messed around and tried out a few glitches just to kind of fool around with the game. And I, I'm gonna go on another tangent here. I have a funny
That's fine.
story to share
Yeah.
about that. So the whirlpool in Dire Docks, I I had seen like a 128 ways to die in SM64 video, and that included the whirlpool. But the guy tricked me into thinking that it led to a bonus stage, and I fell for it.
Oh,
So
got him.
just a funny story related to that. But yeah, eventually I downloaded the game on WeVC at my house, and then eventually the very first speed run that I ever really watched was Honey's 147.05 120-star run.
Hmm.
So this would have been back in like 2000. This would have been back in like 2013. So I was in sixth grade at the time. Um, Yeah, I got started young, but I don't really have verified proof of much of anything before 2017, so it's up to you if you decide I'm a trustworthy source. But um,
For the sake of this episode, I'll believe
okay,
it.
yeah, just going forward. So, um, and what fascinated me about watching that run was just how many of the glitches I'd seen in all those other glitch compilation videos were actually used in the speedrun, and just how many creative ways there were to collect all the stars in the game, and just how quickly it could be done. And so I eventually messed around with trying some of the speedrun strats on WeVC for myself. And before you knew it, a new speedrunner was born, and it's been downhill ever since. Just kidding.
Okay.
But, um, so that was kind of the itch that got it started. And for a while, it was just SM64 on WeVC. I eventually switched to Nintendo 64, and I actually got it as a Christmas present in December of 2014. No, wait. Yeah. It was December 2014, and so I've been playing on that ever since. Um, so you kind of go forward. I never really, and then I got on Twitch at about the same time. My username, I basically to explain the origins behind my username. So I am a massive Gradius fan, which is the shoot 'em up series by Konami. And I've been one for about half my life at this point. And SuperViperT302 was a like random custom ship idea I came up with in like sixth grade.
Hmm.
I don't remember much about it. All I remember is that Super is supposed to be a reference to the Super Cobra, which is the second player ship from Salamander 2. Viper, obviously a reference to Vic Viper, and then T302 is supposed to be a nod to the Vic Viper T301 model from Gradius 5. So
Oh, so
I
you're
just
one
kind of
better, huh?
yeah, yeah. And so when I joined the wonderful world of the World Wide Web, I just kind of picked that as my username because I thought it sounded cool, and I've just kind of stuck with it ever since. I've had people recommend that I shorthand it to just like Super Viper or something, but I'm like, no, I need the full username.
Very
That's
important.
when I joined Twitch, and of course, I was a young lad, so I took me a while to kind of get a grasp of like everything I was seeing and stuff. And then I don't think much of anything interesting happened until early 2015 when I actually sat down and watched Joselle Astrid's run of Super Mario Galaxy 2 from AGDQ 2014. And when I watched that run for the very first time, sort of two things kind of went through my head there. One was, first of all, this game looks like way too much fun. I have to try it. And because I played Galaxy 1 casually prior to that, and I enjoyed the game enough, but never really gave it that much attention. But then, of course, I see this run, and it's just like, okay, yeah, this game looks so much more fun than Galaxy 1. But then also, I could, like, see myself doing the things that Joselle was doing at the time in her run, like all these crazy infinite flutters and gravity skips and stuff. And all this sick platforming, and I kind of had the vision of one day I think I could be capable of doing all of that, and maybe even get my own chance to run that kind of game like on a stage in front of a live audience. And that ended up kind of being a little bit of an omen, I guess, but
Hmm.
we'll come back to that. So that was how I got into Galaxy 2. That would have been early 2015. um, and around the same time is um, I'm to explain Pack and Roll Remix now because nobody knows what this game is. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge fan of like Namco arcade games, and I'm especially big of like a big fan of like Namco compilations, so the Namco museums. And um, one of the compilations I sought out early on was a Namco Museum Megamix, which is for the Wii, and it has a bunch of arcade games, which is like the main reason I sought it out. But it also has these 6 remix games, and of course I played through those games as well because that's part of the package, it's part of the deal. And when I first played Pack and Roll Remix, and again this probably would have been back in like 2012 or something, so I was still like super young. When I first played through Pack and Roll Remix, I um mostly just kind of played through with a focus on getting everything because I was very much of a completionist at the time. But when I came back to the game in like 2015, I don't remember what made me come back to it, but I remembered finding a shortcut in one of the later levels, and I was kind of thinking to myself, this game might actually have some speedrunning potential. So I went through all of the stages and routed them out, and eventually I found a bunch of other shortcuts and skips kind of on my own. And my very first run of Pack and Roll Remix was like 47 minutes. Um, and then I think the very next run afterwards, I brought it down by like almost 10 minutes because I found a bunch of new skips and just kind of got better at optimizing the game. And of course, the time has come down way since then. That game has mostly just been kind of a solo effort by me, and I would kind of just consider it a passion project. But that's how I got started in Pack and Roll Remix, and of course, I still play it to this day. I've had someone there's been like barely anybody else who's even touched the game, let alone like actually bothered learning speedrun strats. Like the closest person who has ever gotten close to my times is someone from, I think it was a Speedy Cube 64 is the name. A couple of years ago, they just decided to try out the game, and they ended up getting like a 26-minute time, which is, I would say, is relatively good for the amount of time they put into the game. And then there is a Japanese runner who has actually ran the Pac-Man Museum Plus version and has brought the time in that down to a high 22-minute time, which is not that far off the current Wii World Record. And the Pac-Man Museum Plus version could definitely be fast. Is definitely faster than the Wii version. So if they ever decide to go back to that and optimize it even further, I have no doubt that they'll bring that record below my Wii personal best. But the Wii and Museum Plus leaderboards are split. So there's Pack and Roll Remix. The other game I can talk about is Mario Kart 64. I don't really run that game anymore. I think I retired from it in late 2022, and I put retired in quotes because there's the possibility I'll probably come back to it someday. And I've played it like at the past couple SGDQs I've been to just for the fun of it. But I got into that game because I watched Abney's SGDQ 2015 run, and it was kind of a similar mindset I had with Galaxy 2, where it's just like this game looks like so much fun. I want to learn this speed run, and this looks like the kind of game that's in my alleyway because I mean it's a racing game, but I just kind of loved the variety of shortcuts there were and the variety of methods in actually achieving the shortcuts. And so I picked that game up like mid late 2015, I want to say. I don't think I really took it seriously at first, and then once I actually got the game on N64, then I kind of started like actually trying to learn all the shortcuts. And I don't think it was until like or mid 2016 that I actually started considering myself somewhat competent at that game. So those are kind of the main four games that I ran for a few years. And then just I I have speedrun times for Rhythm Heaven Fever on speedrun.com, even though it's barely a game worth considering speedrunning because it's a rhythm game and therefore it's all just auto scrollers. But to kind of explain how I got into that, that was because of a Laser Trap, um, who I've been friends with for several years now at this point. They uploaded piano covers of Remix 8 and Remix 9 from the original from Rhythm Heaven DS onto their channel, and I just checked them out out of curiosity. And then I looked up because I've never been into rhythm games much beforehand, but when I looked up, the original video and music for Remix 8 from Rhythm Heaven DS, I just kind of fell in love with it. And this would have been in about 2023 or so. And I basically spent like the rest of 2023 just like learning more about the franchise, learning more about all the different games in the series, about how remixes worked, and like I eventually stumbled upon custom remixes, which is something I spend a lot of my time doing these days. Um, and then in early 2024, I actually bought a copy of Rhythm Heaven for DS and 100%ed that game in like a week. And then that August would have been when I got Rhythm Heaven Fever. This is August of 2024, and then shortly after I got Rhythm Tengoku, and I've 100%ed all three of those games at this point. So that's kind of an introduction to like the main focus points of like my speed running career, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. So those are the main titles and kind of
Sort
just
of.
focused on that.
I also run a lot of SM64 ROM hacks, but that's obviously ties back to the original SM64. So
Yeah, and that's its own
I
rabbit
run.
hole.
Yeah.
There's so
So
many.
I run Mario 74, Star Road, SM64 The Green Stars, SM64 Shining Stars. See, then there's Star Revenge 6 and Star Revenge 6.5, and then I've also run Randomizer for
Mhm.
the original game.
The past couple months, personally, I've been just playing a bunch of ROM hacks in my spare time, so I
Hmm.
finally played most of those.
Hmm. Yeah, I think Mario 74 as a speed game is extremely underrated. Because the thing with that game is that it does have a massive difficulty spike in the last, like in courses 14 and 15, the
Oh
sphere
yeah, I
levels,
remember.
and in the last Bowser level, and that does make speedruns of the game somewhat challenging because those levels are obviously going to be really late into the run, so they're very good choke points. But what I've kind of found from playing that game is that during your first runs of the game, when you do the sphere levels and the final Bowser level and all the other hard stuff, it's like you're probably going to die a bunch of times. And then as you do your next few runs, you start to put a big focus on consistency and trying to, and eventually you're able to consistently get through the like 100 coin stars and the Bowser 3 red coins without dying on your first try. And so that's obviously going to be like a massive time save for future runs. But then even beyond that, I've just found that ever since I started getting a lot more consistent, I'm just able to move through the levels more fluidly than usual. Like, you just naturally get more comfortable at navigating the level the longer you play it. And I think if you can get over that sort of like if you can get over that sort of learning curve, then I think Mario 74 would be a really great ROM hack for anyone to speedrun because there's a lot of really cool like platforming in that hack, and both intended and unintended. And it does still have an emphasis on movement, but I feel like that hack has a lot more emphasis on like consistency and hitting certain strats. And I always like that in speedruns. It's one of the reasons why I like the ROM hacks that I play. Like Star Road, I think is a ROM hack everybody should be familiar with, and I think the speedruns for that game are amazing to watch just because that hack is so ridiculously broken.
Hmm.
But it's also an extremely punishing hack to speedrun. So 130 star in particular is an absolute beast. Speaking from experience. Um, Green stars, I mostly got into because of like some of Simple Flips's old records, and then eventually Segotu picked up the game, and of course Segotu is just an absolute beast at anything SM64. Um, and so that's kind of what prompted me to do Green Stars. I don't think Green Stars is as good of a speed run, but because it is mostly just kind of movement, and there's not that many cool strats. But I feel like what it lacks in quantity, it makes up for in quality. Because you have the strat in the Molten Magma Galaxy where you fly hands free with a bob bomb to clip you through this pillar in order to skip the shell ride for that 1 star. And then there's a Death Star grab in Melting Snow Peaks, I think is the name, where you trigger a death barrier and then clip into this tunnel and grab a star after dying. And I think that's one of the only RTA viable Death Star grabs that I know of in any SM64 ROM hack. So the fact that that's in a speed run is really really cool to see. SM64 to talk about. Go ahead and cover the other ones. So Shining Stars. I got into again because to go to and also Theory Locked. They were kind of in like a world record-ish battle over the 121 star category for a little while back in like 2014, and that hack looked kind of cool, so I decided to try it out because like the movement in this hack looks really fun, and also a lot of the 100 coin routes are pretty cool and they flow really nicely. Um, And then a few years later in 2020, which is 2020 would be when I started like seriously speedrunning ROM hacks, because of course by this point I could actually stream them. And looking back on it, Shining Stars isn't that well made of a hack. It has,
Really?
yeah, it's the original, like there's Shining Stars repainted, and I haven't seen much of that, but that hack is a lot. It looks like it appears to be a lot better
That
quality
hack's
than the original.
fantastic. I've played it. The original. Anyway.
It has a lot of collision errors, and there's soft lock places in like almost every level because of this again, this hack was released in like 2013, 2014, and knowledge of SM64 collision mechanics wasn't as well documented back then. So there's just a lot of invisible walls and like floor overshadowing just everywhere in that hack. And I'm not kidding when I say you can soft lock the game within 5 seconds of starting a new file. It's but it's like, and some of the soft locks are actually soft locks that a casual player could come across, which is even worse. But it was one of SM64 Pi's like first like major hacks. So I mean, you can give them a bit of a pass on that.
The
But
growth
it's
was good, but
I do
yeah.
want to learn Shining Stars 2 at one point, because that hack is also hilariously broken. It's not as like it's not as unpolished as Shining Stars 1 is from what I've seen, but it has a lot of really cool like clips and skips and stuff that I think would make it a really fun hack to speedrun. And then as for the Star Revenge 6 and 6.5, those were again mostly Segotu, and I watched Bit Dip on a Bus's Let's Plays of those hacks, and those are among my favorite Let's Plays of his. Um, that got me interested in those hacks, and then I looked up the speedruns for those hacks, and Segotu had a like theory task of 120 star that was uploaded on Tomato Bird's channel actually. And I saw that at first. When I first saw that task, I'm like, "There's no way half of these strats could ever be done RTA. They just look way too inconsistent and like way too much risk for how little reward they probably save." But then eventually Segotu started running a slightly updated version of the hack that has the whole 6 red coins and 80 coins instead of 100 coin stars, and it's also got an additional 121st star, and a couple sections are made a little bit easier, a couple boss fights in particular. But I was able to see him like execute a lot of those strategies in real time, and I'm like, this hack might actually be kind of approachable. I actually learned that hack after Star Revenge 6.5. There's not much of a story with 6.5. It was just I thought it looked cool and I wanted to try it. Both of those hacks are extremely punishing. Um, because I feel like Star Revenge 6 especially, it's not like an extreme difficulty hack, but it's the kind of hack that I feel like was designed to be played with save states, because course 1 in particular, the Lakeside Golf, if you fall like almost anywhere in that course, you don't die, but you land in this water, and it takes ages to swim to somewhere where you can get back onto land, and then you have to climb all the way back up. So it's things like that that lead me to believe that the hack was designed to be played with save states. So that makes making large mistakes in that hack extremely common and extremely punishing, because you could die on a 100 coin star and there's 3 minutes gone. And I'm choosing to play the harder version of that, the harder, older versions of the hack, because I've never been a fan of how modern day ROM hacks do the whole 6 red coins and 80 coin stars
I hate
thing.
that too. I wish they
Yeah,
would at least have the option to have the original counts,
yeah.
but no.
I mean, there's another Mario Adventure, which I've never played, but I have seen playthroughs of that, which has 7 red coins, but there's 8 red coins in every level. So I guess that's a little bit better, but
Hmm. You see,
just
what
a
I
little bit
do
of
when I casually play is I just get 8 and 100 out of spite.
yeah, do that before you get the star. I actually never thought of doing it that way, but that's interesting. But and I assume they did that because players don't want to be searching around levels for all these coins. But come on, that's part of the game.
I just wish there was an option, because yeah, you can have
Yeah.
like the easier option if you want it, and then the more original option if you want it. That's all I'm asking for.
Hmm. Yeah, there has been a bit of a push in recent times for games to be like more accessible to casual players, and it's sort of that I get where that comes from, and I don't disagree with it, but I also don't think it's always mandatory. Like
Depends.
there was a I don't remember who made the post, but a while back, someone on Twitter made a post saying how like every game should have like accessibility options, like the usual accessibility options like volume balance or minimizing flashing lights or colorblind options, which I can
Mm-hmm.
get, or like auto fire. I think auto fire is something that like shoot 'em ups especially should have. Um, which thankfully most of them do, and if they don't, there's usually an emulator option that lets you that lets you um but they also mentioned something like difficulty settings should be in modern games. And I asked about this for clarification. Like, would that include like big collectathon games like the Mario Galaxy games? And they even said, like, yes, those games should have difficulty options. And I'm like, I'm just thinking, how would that work? Because
How do you make it easy?
it's like, or like, how do you scale the difficulty? Is it just like randomizer in SM64 where you can go hardcore and just put in a bunch of other enemies? Or just like make the coin locations harder to locate or harder to reach, or like like at that point you're basically just like if you're gonna include like a harder difficulty option, you're basically just making a Kaizo ROM hack. That's what you're doing.
Maybe not that
Um,
far, but
well, yeah, obviously, but
I don't know.
yeah, it's like how do you make the perfect run harder? Add a time limit and add cosmic clones.
Hmm. Now we're talking.
Yeah, but, so. Yeah, that's kind of my history with all of those ROM hacks. There's a couple other ROM hacks that like I said, I want to learn Shining Stars too. I can't think of any others I'm interested in learning off the top of my head, as um other than maybe Kaizo Mario 64, even though that's like a difficulty ROM hack, and I am notoriously bad at those. Um, I feel like learning that hack would be like doing a run of that hack would be somewhat interesting, but optimizing it would be an absolute nightmare because of how hard that hack is. Which is crazy to say because that hack was released in like 2011 and the tools to work with back then were extremely primitive.
Hmm.
So, of course, difficulty ROM hacks have skyrocketed since then. And then you like I've also played Mario 74 Extreme Edition. I have like 114 stars in that save state list. I need to go back. I haven't played that hack in like over a year just because I haven't felt like it. But I've I don't really think I'd ever want to run that ROM hack. Maybe 50 star, but even that would be kind of pushing it. The other thing you have to keep in mind with my ROM hack experience is I'm one of those people who plays on keyboard for
Hmm.
ROM
Mm-mm.
play, which is mostly just kind of I don't have a controller for my PC and I don't feel like getting one, and keyboard just feels nice, even though it's definitely a hindrance to me. Like you have players like Sagotu and Katze who can like play perfectly well with it, but for me, because I also run SM64 on vanilla hardware with a regular N64 controller, so it's like kind of going back and forth between those two. Obviously, I'm more used to running on an actual controller than keyboard, and playing on a monitor. There's like a tiny amount of input latency to deal with, and it just feels different. But I do prefer it. I feel like I probably could get faster times if I switch to a controller, but for the moment I just don't feel like it.
Fair enough. I mean, that's the beauty of it, right? You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's what I like about speedrunning in general, is that like a lot of it just comes down to like player comfort, even to just like the strats you choose to do. Like I'm very much a consistency, like I'm a consistency person, just straight up when it comes to the games I run. Like I would rather lose that 1 second for the sake of not having a higher risk on that one level, unless
Hmm.
it's Pack and Roll Remix where I go all out, but that's another story.
Hmm. Yeah. Um. It's cool that I've recently have gotten into the ROM hacking scene, and I just so happen to have recently played everything you've apparently run, minus Star Revenge. That there's, uh, I'm almost there. I'm almost to 6.
Yeah,
I'm on 0.5 right now, and I've been playing in release order, so I
that
almost
makes
got there.
sense. Are you gonna try Night of Doom?
Oh, I have like 8 stars.
That's one of those hacks that I will probably never play. Like, even by today's standards, even by today's standards, that hack is still ridiculous. Like, people who speedrun that hack are like a whole nother. And when I say people who speedrun that hack, I mean Stan,
Mhm.
and they're just a whole other breed of crazy.
I've gotten
But
8 stars saved stateless. I've probably played for 6 hours.
yeah, that doesn't sound surprising to me. I would probably be barely any better if that.
So, yeah, not too sure about that one, but I mean, it'd be cool. I'm not into Kaizo. Like, I don't like getting irritated,
There's some
and I
Kaizo
get
hacks I
irritated
like.
very easily.
Yeah, there's some Kaizo hacks I can deal with, like because of like their notoriety, like Kaizo Mario 64, SM74 Extreme Edition. Like, I feel like those hacks are kind of like the like the OG difficulty hacks, so to speak. That's kind of what I like about them because you don't have all these stupid quicksand ledge grabs or,
Hmm.
you know, it's like the level design itself is just genuinely difficult.
Yeah,
And
it's
then you
not like
have the,
bullshit mechanics. It's more.
well, if you want to discount the fact that like there's some stars in SM74 that require like firsty chains,
Oh,
like first,
awesome.
yeah, the Bowser 2 Red Coin Star and SM74 EE requires like a bare minimum of 4 firsties, like back to back almost.
No, I've hit like 17 in a row before. Should be easy.
Yeah, I think my PB is 6, but I've also never really like done it in a super like large enough space to go higher than that.
Hmm.
As in the Uber challenge of SM64, one of the conditions of the Uber challenge is you can't stand on any platform that starts moving when Mario stands on it. So for navigating the toxic maze in HMC, in order to skip the final elevator to that star, you have to do like 6 firsties in a row to get up the elevator shaft.
Hmm.
And so I had to, I because the Uber challenge was originally 39 stars, and then I'm just like, screw it, I'm gonna, because there were certain stars that were either just deemed too hard at the time, because this was made back in like 2008, 2009,
Mm.
and then there was Womp's Fortress, which they had a stupid rule for the Uber challenge back then, where it's just like you can't talk to any characters except like Bowser or Mips, and apparently like some level intro, like when you enter like Bob on Battlefield or Womp's Fortress for the first time, you get like a text box, and in some levels that can be considered like thoughts inside Mario's head, but in Womp's Fortress they specifically say that it's the Lakitu Bros talking to you, and that doesn't count, which I always thought was complete BS. But um
Okay.
because if I'm pretty sure all of those like level opening text boxes are supposed to be the Lakitu Bros talking to you,
Hmm.
because they're the ones that kind of guide you through most of the game, like most of the early mechanics of the game. I feel like, so yeah. There's one star in the Uber challenge that I have an Uber challenge. I think I still have the Uber challenge save file on my cartridge that has, I think, 46 stars on it currently, and there's a 47th star that I know is obtainable, but I've just never been able to piece it all together in one shot. It's Quick Race Through Downtown in Wet Dry World, and I would go into how you're supposed to get that non-TAS on console for under Uber challenge restrictions, but it would take way too long. So we're just gonna skip that. And I
I've
think
never heard
Express
of
Elite,
Uber Challenge until now.
basically coinless, capless, cannonless with a bunch of other arbitrary restrictions.
Okay.
Like,
Hmm.
it's it's dumb.
Yes.
It's really dumb. And also Iron Mario.
Oh, also. Okay.
Yeah, it's also got the iron. Like, it doesn't have the level lockout that Iron Mario does, but it does have the, if you can't take damage or die in any way other than water and fall damage. Also, the Uber challenge allows fall damage,
Hmm.
and if you break any rule at all, you have to reset the game. Like you don't reset your progress. You just have to reset the console and then re-enter the save file. Which is annoying because for one thing, you can't collect coins, but you also can't activate coins or one-ups. Like, so you can't trigger any one-ups like on pulls or whatever. And you can't spawn coins from like enemies or even like Bowser's fire. Which means like you basically can't let Bowser breathe fire and Bowser in the sky.
Okay.
You can't enemies can't die even if Mario wasn't the direct cause of it. So if a if a Bob-omb just walks into a Goomba and the Goomba dies, that's against the rules. It's
Yeah, this sounds dumb.
Yeah, it is dumb, but there's a lot of interesting strategies in that challenge that I think make it kind of neat. But it's like an old game. It's an old game facts thing that was like sort of just it was the hot thing to do for a couple of years, and then it just sort of fizzled out. And I don't think anybody cares about it anymore, just because it's way too many arbitrary restrictions. But
yeah, I like the Iron Mario one. I feel like that's a good balance, and that it's all built into a ROM hack as well. It's pretty cool.
Iron Mario is a weird one to me. Like, maybe I'm just not good enough to understand it, and maybe I am just a whiny brat about it. But I feel like with Iron Mario, the whole taking one bit of damage is an instant game over and you lose all your progress. It like again, maybe I just don't understand it. It just feels a bit much to me, I feel like.
Maybe, but they do, speedruns have like the damageless kind of categories, and
Yeah,
it's kind of playing into that, I guess.
I guess that makes sense.
Just
Like again,
harder damageless, Kaizo damageless.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Putting it under that perspective, I guess it makes a lot more sense because the spawn deaths thing.
Oh yeah, well that is bullshit. But I think yeah, they give you like a second of invincibility upon entering a level now or something. So
there's like an option for that, and if you beat the game with that option, it's still technically considered valid, but you get an extra bonus for beating the challenge without it.
Oh.
You get like it like I don't know for sure, but I think it like gives you like an extra symbol on the file select screen or something.
That's
So
kind of dumb.
my closest I haven't done a whole lot of Iron Mario recently, but my closest attempt to a base 70-star run is 64 stars. And I choked like a dumbass because I was going for TTM 100s. And at the part where it like branches off before the dead end on the slide, I got greedy and tried to get too many coins and ended up falling off and dying. And I was. So
yeah.
I haven't really tried it since then, but I probably should because I'm sure I could get another attempt pretty far into and I'm pretty sure if it weren't for that, I probably could have gone all the way unless something really stupid happened and like Bowser in the sky.
I thought of giving it a try, but I haven't bit the bullet yet.
It's very addicting.
Yeah, it looks like it. Everyone's doing it.
When I got into randomizer in 2023, I was kind of I kind of had the same deal where just like randomizer was like most of what I did for that calendar year, just because again it's just so addicting. I generally don't like speedruns, either playing or watching speedruns that are mostly just RNG grinds. So like like Mario Party speedruns, I think are my prime example of that. It's just I know the novelty of the speedruns to the people who do them, which is this idea that like, it's less about optimization and more about like strategizing around what RNG you get and kind of planning like the route planning essentially. And I get that, but that's just not for me.
So, yeah, like I'll happily watch it, but I could never do a run with heavy RNG. Like I have enough trouble with like Mario 3. I can't do a game that's like fully that.
Or like Mike Tyson's Punch Out.
I do want to get into that though, because I'd never get at a like record level, but I've already grinded some ILs, and no, I don't think any of them were RNG. Like the one I'm stuck on is getting the King Hippo task tie because I never get the pattern for it.
Yeah, it's like It's like a 1 in 37.5 chance or
Like
something.
the odds aren't that bad, but I just never get it.
Yeah, it's like I've been tempted to at least play Punch Out, but not necessarily speedrun it. But you know, that's there's quite a few games that I've like been tempted to want to learn the speedrun for, but for one reason or another, it just doesn't really work out for me. So one of the games is Pac-Man World for the original game on PS1. Um, I'm Pac-Man game, and I'm pretty good friends with Joester98, who's the current goat of that game. Um, and like I do own a copy of the game, and I have played it before. I want to do a casual playthrough of it at some point, but I don't know about speedrunning it because I cannot zigzag to save my life. Like either with the D-pad or with analog, it's just I can't do it efficiently, and my thumb hurts after like a minute of doing it.
Fair.
So I don't think that game is for me. I do want to do a casual playthrough of it at some point. There's also Pac-Man World 2, which I did try to learn back in 2018. After because I've been around the Pac-Man community for a while and knew how popular Pac-Man World 2 speedrunning was and about some of the cool skips that are in that game. And then after Nacho Brado's HDQ 2018 run, I decided to get a copy and try it out. And the game just doesn't agree with me, is kind of what I got. I thought the game would be easier to learn than it was. I never ended up finishing at any percent run. I got a run to like the second to last level, and I spent like 7 minutes trying to do the major skip and then just rage quit. So, and I don't think I've really touched the game since then. But, so that's another game. There's also this is a very weird one. There's The Incredibles, the multi-platform one for like PS2 and Xbox and stuff. I have the PS2 copy. That is another one of those games that's one of those games from my childhood. I played a lot of licensed PS2 games in my childhood. So there's like The Incredibles, Ollie, Toy Story 3, Cars. I'm a Pixar fan in case you can't tell.
Fair.
I love Pixar. But so when I looked up speedruns of The Incredibles, that game is also just hilariously broken. But the problem is that speedruns of that game are more optimal to play on Xbox or PC, and I have the PS2 version, which not only has longer loading times, but one of the core like mechanics in that game, which is known as slope climbing, is a lot harder on PS2. Like I think the window for it is a little bit smaller. Like it's like a couple frames to hit the trick. It's a trick where you can use Mr. Incredible's high jump to basically climb up sloped walls, and it allows like a bunch of sequence breaks in just about every single level he's in. But there's that, and then there's also a couple of skips that just aren't possible on the PS2 version, just from like collision differences or whatever. And I do have an Xbox 360, but there's no way I'm going to there's no way I'm going to do backwards compatible Xbox The Incredibles, because I've heard it has frame rate issues and also texture mapping issues. There's I joined the Incredibles. Yeah, I joined the Incredibles speedrunning Discord to ask about that, and they sent me this like really cursed image of one of the levels that was on Xbox 360. And like the entire texture sheet for that level is just the texture sheet for like Mr. Incredible's face for some reason.
Oh, okay.
It was really weird, and it's just like I don't really want to have to deal with that. So yeah, I'm just not going to deal with that game. And then there's two games that I've speed ran, but not really seriously, and those are the other two 602/246 games, which are Galaxy 1 and Sunshine. And with those two games, like 64 and Galaxy 2, I don't really run 64 seriously anymore. I might touch on that a little bit later, but Galaxy 2 I still run pretty regularly. It's still one of my main speed games. But like Galaxy 1 and Sunshine are just I learned those two games specifically for the 3D Mario 246. And Galaxy
which one is
1,
that?
that's the any percent one. That's 6470 star, Galaxy 1 any percent, Sunshine any percent, Galaxy 2 any percent.
Got it.
So Galaxy 1, it just doesn't feel as entertaining to run as Galaxy 2 does. It does have a lot of cool strats, and a lot of cool skips, and a lot of stars. It does have some interesting tech, and it does have like the 2P stuff, like the 2P jumps, which give it a little bit of extra depth. And it's like I don't hate the game. I don't necessarily hate speedrunning it, but I don't think it's for me. It's it feels like a bit more of a drag to play than Galaxy 2 does, even though I would argue Galaxy 2 has a lot more downtime, and just in general that run is longer. Um, and Also just getting optimal movement in Galaxy 1 feels so much harder than Galaxy 2. And I've noticed this with a lot of other top runners I've watched, where with a lot of top Galaxy 1 runners, playing close to some of best seems extremely rare. It's so easy to make a small, like, even if you don't have like a major mistake on any given star, it's so easy to have like a small movement flub that loses you like 5 seconds. And with how optimized the Galaxy One is becoming, that like makes a huge difference these days. And then of course you have all the dumb strats that have been introduced lately, like the Good Egg 2 Crystal Float, which I still haven't learned and probably never will, because I don't think I'll take Galaxy One that seriously. Um, then as for Sunshine, I actually find Sunshine to be pretty enjoyable, but again, that game just has such a high skill ceiling that I just don't see myself ever becoming super competent at that. Um, what's ironic is that I still don't use Sunshine is arguably the 3D of the four 3D Mario games I run. It's arguably the one I'm the least competent at, and it's the only one I have practice codes for
Hmm.
because I haven't as I don't have an EverDrive or a Game Shark for practice codes on 64, and that's one of the main reasons why I haven't really touched SM64 a whole lot recently in the past few years, because I feel like with where my skill level is at, for me to actually like get better at the game, I can't just learn it in the raw. I have to actually like put effort into learning new strats and practicing them the way actual top runners do. And I just haven't wanted to shell out the cash for an EverDrive. And Game Sharks are apparently very volatile, like very volatile. So I didn't want to invest in that.
At least
I also
those games, you if you have like a completed file, it's doesn't sound as bad to at least get to the place you want to practice over and over because the game kind of gives it to you. But yeah, it's not optimal for sure.
yeah, it's like and I've learned this firsthand from using practice codes for ROM hacks on emulator, and it makes all the difference.
Mm.
Like being able to reload levels instantly, or being able to use save states, being able to actually have the in-game timer. It makes practicing just so much more fun and so much more enjoyable.
See, if you don't have
And
that for like the 2D Mario's, you have to like get your way all the way back there. That's you.
yeah,
So it could be
I haven't.
worse, but
Yeah, with regard to the 2D Mario, since you brought that up, I've never been particularly interested in those either. I do
well,
find the speedruns for them enjoyable to watch, but I don't really see myself ever wanting to play those. I'm kind of tempted to maybe mess with New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I do have a copy of that game that I want to play soon, and by soon I mean soon trademark, obviously.
mhm.
But um, that is a game I've been like kind of interested in, but I just don't know. Maybe if I run out of things to do, that might be a game I pick up. Um, and then back in like 2016, I tried learning the marathon safe zero exit route for Super Mario World that was done at AGDQ 2016 on an emulator on my school Chromebook, and that went
Mhm.
about as well as that went about as well as you'd think it would.
I see.
Yeah, but yeah, then kind of get back to like my polarization and how competent I am at the 602/246 3D Mario's. In my current 246 PB, my SM64 70 star time was a 50:32, I think, which is less than a minute off my current PB, which is 49:40. And then my Galaxy 2 run was a sub 3. It was a 2:59:58. So those are both like really, really respectable times. for like any multi Mario runner in those two games. And then my Galaxy 1 run was a 237, which is 25 minutes off of record. And my Sunshine run was a 133, which is 20 minutes off record. So you can very clearly tell where my priorities lie in multi Mario just based on that run.
Yeah.
And so, and then there's also one other game that I actually have done a run of this recently in the past couple months, just for the fun of it. I've learned speedrun strats for it, but never like properly learned the speedrun is actually SM64 DS.
Oh.
I and coming from someone who has played both that game and the N64 version, I don't necessarily think it's the controls that is SM64 DS's problem. I think it's more so like the movement mechanics of SM64 DS. Like the way momentum works in that game is extremely unintuitive, especially compared to the original SM64. Like in SM60 in vanilla SM64, you can kind of control your mid-air positioning relatively easily. Like, you can do back kicks in midair, you can pull back into the side. In SM64 DS, if you do a kick or a dive in midair, your like direction and velocity is just locked. So if you try to kick to land on a platform and you dive instead, you're just falling down, and you there's really nothing you can do about it. And I feel like that's kind of what makes SM64 DS a lot more tricky to play, especially for people who primarily play the N64 version. But I do think that game has a lot of really cool strats, and that's another game where it's just like if I ever run out of things to do, that could be a game where I like actually sit down and properly learn it. That would be one game that I'd be very interested in, like maybe not necessarily going for top level times on, but getting like respectable PBs in like 80 star and 150 star. I don't see myself ever running the any percent categories for that game because they're dumb. Any percent in SM64 DS is really, really stupid.
Yeah, it does look a tad ridiculous. You just kind of clip through everything.
It's like you can make the argument that SM64 DS is more broken than the N64 version.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, especially if you want to, as there's the whole null egg glitch, which like it's the glitch where you bounce on an enemy at the same time that you like throw an egg as Yoshi, and you can get him to like hold an invisible object. And apparently that can just eat up the entire game code. And I feel like I'm not much of like a programmer or anything like that. All I know is what I get from like retro game mechanics explains videos, the ones run by IsoFreeze. But um, you know, I feel like that glitch has a lot of untapped potential based on like the memory manipulation that it would be capable of causing. But I have no idea how the internal structure of SM64 DS works. I honestly find it crazy that arbitrary code execution exists in Sunshine before it exists in 64.
Oh yeah, that is a thing now.
But unfortunately, based on what I've heard from being around the task community, it doesn't sound like Ace is really a possibility in SM64 just because of the way memory is handled in that game.
Mm. Rip. Oh well.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we never like you went over all the games, but we didn't go like into detail or go past like the early years, so we could get back on the timeline side of things if you
Mm-hmm.
remember where we were.
Yeah. That I mean, I feel like in terms of like going over the actual timeline, I'd say that's probably the gist of it. But I guess to kind of go into more specifics. So my first like recorded proof of anything speedrunning related would have been in early 2016, which would have been the end of my 8th grade year, because um, we had our school district had Chromebooks for every student in the district. Um, and one of my friends one of my friends at the time, a different friend than the one I talked about previously, who had also gotten into speedrunning, found a website called webcamera.io
Mm.
that worked on Chromebooks. And so I used that to record like demonstration speedruns, so to speak, which like aren't necessarily PB runs, but are supposed to like demonstrate my skill level. So I
Just
did that for
proof
like
that
SM60.
you're not cheating,
Yeah,
probably.
or prove that I am legit, because I did a lot of like speedruns live races back in 2015 and 2016, and basically they just had to go off an honor system for me.
That was
Um,
most people. Well, I guess I wasn't around back then. SRL kind of was already dying off by the time I got into anything. But yeah, I know for a lot of people, you just kind of typed in the chat like, "Hey, I started. Hey, I finished." That
yeah,
that was pretty
dot
much
chain.
all it was.
Yeah, and now we have race time, which is
Hmm.
I would say definitely is an improvement of a platform.
Even
Um,
that, I haven't really looked into or used much, and I don't hear many people talk about it. It's kind of a shame.
it's it's pretty cool. I've used it several times. It's not that much different than SRL, but it's
You just
the
don't need the
interface.
annoying like IRC chat or whatever the hell.
Yeah. You don't need that. That was definitely like the big drawback of SRL back in the day. But yeah, getting back to the recording thing. So I would record runs like SM64, 16, and 70, Pack and Roll Remix 90%. That was how a lot of the early world records in that game were archived. Um, there was some Mario Kart 64 stuff. I couldn't really do Galaxy 2 because the website I was using had like a 1 hour limit on recording length. So I couldn't really record anything longer than that without splitting it into segments. And then in 2017, I got my GV USB 2, which is still the capture card I use to this day. I absolutely love the thing.
The classic.
And it took me until like July of that year to actually figure out how to like use it and how to set up the splitters and stuff properly in order to like actually stream from my PC. But um, eventually I did figure that out, and that's when I could start like actually streaming speedrun attempts for real. And at the time, I would say I treated SM64 and Galaxy 2 very similarly in terms of how I prioritized them. Like, I would say my level of competence in both games was very similar. And then Pack and Roll Remix was already down to like a 24-minute run at the time. So I was obviously already really hyper optimizing that game. And then Mario Kart 64 was like maybe third rank in that, but I had like a high 30-minute time in the 150cc skips category, and I very quickly got actual verified PBs in all of my main speedrunning categories after I started streaming. So I think that kind of helped me out a lot. But then as time sort of went on, I found that I was my level of competence with Galaxy 2 was increasing, whereas my skill level in SM64 wasn't really increasing all that much. I had a little bit of I made a document about this a while back, just kind of talking about it, but I had a little bit of I'm honestly kind of ashamed to look back on the kind of speedrunner I was back in like 2017 to 2018, because I very much had a bit of an ego complex. I was thinking
Mm.
I would be like the next hot thing, and that has not happened. And I got a number of humblings back then, and looking back on it, I don't know what the heck I was thinking with some of the ways I behaved. Like there was the speed gaming tournament for 70 star in late 2017 that I was expecting to like be the champ of for some reason, and I I didn't stand a chance. I lost to blue blob in like the first round of the like bracket, and I really should have seen it coming. But yeah, there I could give a few more examples, but I'll kind of stop there. But yeah, kind of getting back to that. So I started taking Galaxy 2 a lot more seriously once I started getting good enough to get my any percent PB down into like the 305 range, which was considered really good at the time. Because at the time I was basically the only top runner active, because Valu had kind of destroyed the category with the high 301 57 world record. Nemi was inactive, and then the only two other runners that were even like, there were only a few other runners that were competent enough to like compete with me at the time. but they either didn't play the game actively enough or didn't quite have the consistency there to get good enough times. So I was just kind of by myself for basically I'd say 2 or 3 whole years at that point. Like, because I was the guy submitting Galaxy 2 to like any online marathon that I felt like was good enough, which I think helped give the game a lot of exposure. Um, because I think a lot of people said they got into Galaxy 2 because of my SGDQ run, and we can talk about that later. But yeah, I was really like my highest ranking ever in Galaxy 2 any percent was second place because I was able to bot value, but by that point Nemi had gotten a mid 3 flat, and I knew my skill level was like still way behind Nemi's. I never really cared much about like going for the world record in that category, just because I didn't really want to push myself with everything else that I had going on. And the only reason I feel like I was ever able to reach a ranking that high on the leaderboards is again because I basically had nobody I had nobody actively running who I could compete with. And then in 2020 there was kind of a bit of a boom in Galaxy 2, and a lot more people became a lot better at the game, and sure enough my ranking has fallen quite a bit since then. Um, but I've still tried to keep up with the times a little bit, and I'd say I have a fairly respectable PB right now, even though I'm still 5 minutes behind the world record at this point. The game has gotten crazy optimized in the past 5 years. It's with the advent of, JP Virtual Console, and then Chinese disk being found, and then all the 2P strats, and, Sorbetti skip becoming possible. And that's one of the reasons why I have a hard time keeping up with stuff like that because I'm very much like, and I would consider myself an old dog at this point when it comes to speedrunning. Like, it's hard to teach an old dog new things. That's one of the reasons why I stopped really running Mario Kart 64 is because, you had the shortcut revolution in 2020 and 2021, and I didn't feel up to learning all of that, and I just wasn't up to it. And again, and that's kind of the same thing with SM64, where you have a lot of these micro optimizations that can be made everywhere. And I haven't necessarily had the time or the resources to sort of push my skill ceiling in that game higher. And B, I just maybe I'm doubting myself, but I just never saw myself as super capable of some of that stuff, especially considering like I already have times that I'm fairly happy with in the main categories. But if I ever do get like a new controller and an EverDrive, I definitely could see myself pushing my PVs in that game down a lot further. And then of course you have Pack and Roll Remix, which has also been kind of like my secondary project. I've had no competition in the game because nobody cares. But that's kind of what makes it fun, I feel like, is like how do I describe it? It's the kind of thing where you're not necessarily pushing it for the sake of competition, you're pushing it to kind of test the limits of how low it can go. Like one thing I've done for Pack and Roll Remix over the years is make ideal runs, which are basically segmented demos that are not necessarily meant to be like flawless runs, but sort of like if you executed a run super cleanly and did like all the strats that are known, what kind of time would you get? And since the first edition of the ideal run in 2018, the theoretical time has gone down by over 2 minutes. And my sum of best is still 20 seconds behind the current fastest ideal run, which should tell you a lot about how crazy that game is. And of course, that time is still 6.5 minutes behind the tasks, which definitely go check out the tasks of Pack and Roll Remix by Elo Mavi. Those tasks are just absolutely insane. The very first edition of the task was kind of just made without my knowledge, and I discovered it by complete accident. This was in like early 2020, so like near the tail end of my senior year of high school. I just randomly discovered the first task on YouTube while just browsing on my Chromebook. And this was like at the very end of my gym class. I was like, we had some time before the bell rang, so I was on my Chromebook just browsing the internet. And I found the task. It was like 16 minutes 58 seconds RTA timing, which was over 5.5 minutes faster than the record at the time. and I saw this, and I lost my mind. I think I like literally lost my mind like in the middle of the gym floor. Thank goodness nobody noticed.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of a fun that's kind of a fun story.
Yeah. Have you been able to adapt anything from those tasks, or is it just too
Actually, yes,
absurd?
there were a number of strategies that were discovered in the tasks. Like the big one was on the second phase of the final boss, where there's these in order to defeat Galvus, you have to eat 3 power pellets to make him vulnerable, and then you have to eat him. While there's these ghosts that spawn in that have power pellets on them, um, that you can and normally the power pellets, once you eat a power pellet, it's gone until the next phase. But if you leave 3 of the power pellet wielding ghosts behind for the third phase, you can eat those power pellets as Galvus is spawning in for the third time, and and if you get all 3 hits in early, then you can cancel the rest of the animation of him spawning in, and that saves like 10 seconds. And then also the task just opened up the possibility for like a lot more movement optimizations and a couple other levels, like adding in more boosts in like 1-2 and the first phase of the final boss. And then there's also a bunch of skips that are basically tasks only because they're just way too precise. Like 5-1 has a 5-1 has a pretty big skip in it already that saves like 50 seconds that I found in 2017, and it was like the holy grail of skips at the time. But the problem with that skip is that it doesn't work with the normal Pac-Man form, so you have to get the winged pack so that you fall slower and you can get a lot more height out of like slope boosts, which means you have to go through the first gate. But in a task, it is possible to actually do the skip as normal pack, which lets you beat the level in 3 seconds, which would be a 30-second time save. And what's really stupid is on the Pac-Man Museum Plus port of the game, which came out in 2022, the movement physics of Pac-Man were altered, and as such, a bunch of skips that are either tasks only or just straight up not possible on the Wii versions of the game are actually like RTA viable on that version. And so the Museum Plus version saves like I think a minute and a half just
Hmm.
from new skips alone, but it loses some of that time back because of slower loads and menuing. But it's still crazy. I would run the Museum Plus version, but I don't have an HD capture card, and I can't really play the game on Steam because my PC just doesn't like it, and the game runs at the speed of a snail drugged with sleeping pills.
Okay then.
So, and it's for all those reasons that the Wii and Museum Plus leaderboards are actually split. We just kind of decided that because also the slower loads and menuing would provide a massive disadvantage in the other categories that don't necessarily benefit from all those crazy Museum Plus only skips.
Well, they do sound different enough to warrant the split anyway, so.
Yeah, I would say so. And like as the other options would be adding up in-game time, but you can't really do that for Pack and Roll Remix because the boss levels don't have in-game time displayed. And for how unpopular the game is, I'm sure nobody wants to frame count them. And like, because then of course you're leaving it up to human error. Um, and I think the game does actually keep track of how many frames have elapsed in those boss fights behind the scenes, but there would be no way to. It just doesn't visually display it, and of course, then you'd have to get into conversations about modding the game, and that's a whole other can of worms that's not worth getting into, and just really just isn't a viable option at this point.
Mhm.
So it's probably not the ideal solution, but it was I because the other idea is that it allows the Museum Plus versions to become competitive if they ever do, without letting the Wii versions be obsoleted.
Mhm. Sounds like very complicated game for not having much interest, I guess, overall. It's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
and it's been kind of crazy because occasionally I ask myself like if I haven't been around to play this game, would anybody else have found all the stuff that I found? And I want to say possibly, but maybe it would have taken longer.
And there's no way to know.
As there's actually so 2-1 has a gate skip that lets you skip most of the entire level and it saves like 35 seconds. And I found that skip on my own, kind of like in stages. So where like I'd figure one thing out, but then I'd come across another obstacle and it's like, okay, can I get past this? Then I figured out another way past that. I'm like, okay, can I get past this? And then I eventually figured out, okay, so now I can do this precise ledge grab hop to get onto the goal platform without opening the gate, and that skips the gate. And I found that all that on my own. And then a while later, I found out that several months prior, Ion G had actually they never really speedran the game seriously from what I could tell, but they had found an alternate variation of the gate skip like several months before I had ever figured it out on my own, which was kind of interesting. But
Hmm.
and then there's like one IL runner that did some rather slow ILs of a few stages, but then there was one stage in particular, 5-3, which was already pretty darn broken because it was one of those vertical stages. That was actually the stage I originally found shortcuts on. It's one of those vertical stages where you can kind of just fall around death planes
Hmm.
and skip a bunch of like slow climbing downwards. They found out a way to beat the level in like 6 or 7 seconds, and like that just kind of blew me away at the time. And then eventually I optimized the level to under 6 seconds, which
Yeah.
amazingly, at least in a task setting, isn't it's not it's no longer the fastest level in the game.
Hmm.
But it is the fastest level for RTA runners, though.
Got it.
That's yeah, and I've also been wanting to get a Pack and Roll Remix into GDQ for several years now. I actually did get the game accepted into SGDQ 2018, but I wasn't able to go, so I had to back out.
Mm.
And I have submitted the game to several GDQ events since then. It just hasn't. I guess they just haven't yet accepted it. And what's funny is that I've gotten Galaxy 2 in twice since then. Once as a solo run and once as a race. And so I'm hoping that this will be the year. I mean, if it's not that big a deal. But I would like to show that game off on the big stage, especially since I had a chance and just wasn't able to capitalize on it.
Well, since you brought it up, I would like to get into marathon run history. So.
Yeah, and I have a bit of an extensive list of that, especially from like 2017 through 2019. If it seemed worth it, I would submit to it. And I would usually submit all my games, and chances are I'd get like 2 or 3 of them in, if not all 4. There were a few marathons where I got all 4 in, which the 4 at the time would be SM64, Mario Kart 64, Pack and Roll Remix, and Galaxy 2. Um, and I don't really do it as much these days, just because my standards for marathons to submit to have increased. Nowadays, the only organization I really play for is Retro Gaming Live TV.
Mm-hmm.
They've let me do a lot of like showcases of various Gradius games in the series. And recently, I've also gotten to show off a bunch of like my Mario runs there as well, which have been really. I always kind of like, getting to show off what the games I play are made of, show off some of the strategies, kind of provide some interesting trivia about the game, give some interesting commentary, stuff like that. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay, you
Sorry.
just weren't saying anything.
I was not. I'm still not. I don't know.
So I guess we can talk about my SGDQ 19 run, because that was an experience, to put it lightly. So I actually don't know how that game got in, because remember, I had gotten Pack and Roll Remix in the previous SGDQ and then couldn't go. So then I had submitted both Pack and Roll Remix and Galaxy 2 to both SGDQ 18 and 19. And not only did they give me a chance to run again for SGDQ 19, but they also gave me a chance with the longer of the 2 runs. And thankfully, I was able to go that time. But so my PB at the time of submitting was like a low 304. And this was shortly after Nemi came back to the game and smashed the previous world record and had revealed like a bunch of new optimizations that could be added, several of which I had added in by that point. And then eventually the new route was discovered, which had a Honey Bloom 1 added to the route. And so with that route, I was able to bring my PB down to the low 302 range by the time my SGDQ run came around. And during like practice no resets, I could relatively consistently get runs of like 305. I think I did 3 no resets at home prior to going to SGDQ. The first one actually got a 21-second PB with a 302.21, which came out of nowhere. And then the other 2 were like mid-low 305s, which is still a respectable time and would still have beaten Value's AGDQ 17 run by 3 minutes. And then in the private practice room at SGDQ 19, I actually got a mid 305, which was about what that was like the time I was aiming for. And then when I went on stage, when it was time for my run, I went on stage and, I get everything set up, and my sensor bar just kind of isn't wanting to cooperate. And so we spent like 15 to 20 minutes trying to work that out. We like tried different controllers, tried even a different Wii console, and nothing seemed to be working. And I had encountered this problem before because I actually tried to do a Galaxy 2 run for another in-person marathon at that in 2018, which wasn't necessarily at something like GDQ, but it was like this giant gaming convention that wasn't really suited for speedrunning marathons because you have a lot of guys, you have a lot of people just sitting on PCs like 3 feet away, just playing some like MMOs or shooters or whatever, and just screaming all the time and having these loud pop-offs. So like you can barely hear my commentary over the stream just because of how loud everything in the background is. And I had run into the same sensor bar issues with that run. And I was nervous about the sensor bar issues for my SGDQ 19 run, and of course that happened. And eventually we just like, we're just gonna go with it. And as a result, I got screwed over by a lot of things that weren't necessarily my fault many times over the course of that run. But I feel like the sensor bar issues were spread out enough to the point where like I was still able to kind of like relax and sort of enjoy myself with the run, because I am a very momentum based player. I am the kind of player where if I'm doing a run, if I'm playing well, I will generally continue to play well. But once I start kind of dropping spaghetti all over the floor and bleeding time, then it tends to just kind of go downhill from there. Or it can. It's gotten a lot better in recent years. I think my mindset for doing no resets has improved a lot, more so with marathon runs. Like I've gotten a lot better at just brushing off mistakes, but that more so applies in PB attempts. So I was kind of nervous about that getting to me during SGDQ, but like a lot of the like major strats that I would say I was most concerned about hitting, it didn't really cause a problem with. And I did die like 9 times in that run, which is way more than what it should have been. And my final time ended up being over 10 minutes behind PB and like 7 minutes behind what I would have liked. But it was still a relatively entertaining run, and kind of, I feel like it having the commentators and like the donation reader, I feel like kind of helped me deal with it a little bit. And because I would definitely agree with everybody who's ever talked about like in-person GDQ runs, it's always going to be the first few minutes that you're extremely nervous, and then once you kind of get into the groove of things, especially for a run of that length, then you kind of start to feel yourself, and you can just relax more and just enjoy playing the game. And I was able to laugh off a lot of issues that I had, and I still say I had a lot of fun with the run. I haven't really been interested in necessarily doing another solo run of that game for a GDQ event, just because there are runners who are way better than me who would be way more qualified to do it. And then there was the AGDQ 23 online race, which I managed to finish that run 12 minutes ahead of my SGDQ 19 run, but granted, I was using my home setup, so I had a lot more. It was a lot more easier for me, and yet it was still like the most stressful 3 hours of my life. Because I had made the smart decision of, not only was I not going to like look at the restream or the chat or Discord or listen to the commentators, but also I wasn't going to use splits and I wasn't going to use my timer because I didn't want to know what pace I was on because I was afraid if I knew my pace or my if I knew my pace or my like placement compared to the other runners, that might dictate my mentality, or it might cause me to play a little bit riskier than I feel like I should, and that could, cause a massive time loss and just ultimately end up making me look like a complete embarrassment in front of hundreds of thousands of viewers. Um, but I think that kind of worked against me because I ended up playing really well to the point where I thought I was on PB pace for most of the run when I was close to PB, but not really ahead of it. And so I'm just like, I get super stressed out during those types of runs, especially if I have to finish them, because I'm always thinking to myself, like, where is this going to go wrong? But thankfully, during that run, I managed to play consistently. I had a couple of time losses in World 6, but that's to be expected because World 6 is where runs go to die anyways. So, and I was slightly over a minute behind my PB at the time, with a time that I was very satisfied with at the time. So that's kind of my very limited GDQ history when it comes to doing GDQ runs. I've been on their hot fix a couple times in 2020, but
Mm-hmm.
besides that, really all I have left at this point that I would be interested in is doing Pack and Roll Remix at a main event. So again, fingers crossed that this is the one. I also submitted a Rhythm Heaven Fever All Medals blindfolded because I think I don't know what the chances of getting a Rhythm Heaven game into a GDQ would be because, it's not really much of a game that's worth speedrunning, like I said earlier. But I think having it be a blindfolded run would make it pretty interesting.
They've been
Um,
having more unique submissions recently. I wouldn't.
yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, and I also added a donation incentive, so hopefully
Mm,
that gives me the boost. And I just think like Rhythm Heaven Fever is really the only game that would be worth doing a blindfolded run of. I don't know much about Rhythm Heaven Megamix, about how that game's like menuing works because I don't own a 3DS, and even if I did in North America, that game was only released digitally, so I'd either have to import like a European copy or use totally illegal means to get the game. And at the
I
moment, I'm
love all
just not
my.
interested.
The 3DS has a really good totally legal means thing, so it's not too
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, and I don't. And Rhythm Heaven Megamix is emulated really poorly, so I don't. So that's obviously not an option.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Rhythm Tengoku, which is the GBA one, um, has good menu. You can menu without sight pretty easily, but there's like a couple games in particular where you really do kind of need to have visuals, or else you need to memorize the cues in order to make sure you hit the right inputs correctly, and that's just it seems like too much for me. And then Rhythm Heaven DS doesn't necessarily have that, but all of the menuing is done with the touch screen, and so you can see where the problem in that lies.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think you could, in theory, do it, but it's probably not worth messing with a
I
whole
mean,
lot.
Zallard for the Punch Out Wii had to navigate with the Wii mode,
Yeah, I've
so
I've seen that run.
anything's
Thankfully,
possible.
Rhythm Heaven Fever, you can do all of your menuing just with the D-pad. Um, and it also doesn't like if you're at the end of like a row or column, it doesn't like loop back around to the other side if you press the button again. So that makes it very easy to know where you are in the menu as long as you're good at counting in your head and you know where like all the options are. There is the annoying aspect of in Rhythm Heaven Fever, there's two moments in the game where you actually reset the game, which is like the only bit of speed tech in the category I run is all medals, where you need to get superb rankings on every single stage, which doesn't necessarily mean perfect play, but good. It needs to be pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm.
And you can skip the rhythm test tutorial segment at the very beginning and the credits sequence after Remix 7 by resetting the console. On Wii U, you actually have to enter the home menu,
Oh,
and but on the Wii, you have a physical reset button on the console that you can just press that. But unfortunately, my Wii doesn't really like to accept discs anymore. It just kind of eats them and then rejects them out. And it's happened back in like 2020, and it was what prompted me to get a Wii U in the first place. Um, And for several years, I just used my Wii as a way to like play Sunshine, in case I ever needed to play it for like a 246 or whatever. Um, but then eventually I decided to try doing a Rhythm Heaven Fever. I tried to play Rhythm Heaven Fever on the Wii, and amazingly, I got my Wii to actually accept the disc. And so I was able to do my I do an all metals blindfolded run on that, which I used as my SGDQ submission. But then I accidentally ejected the disc shortly after moving to the new place a couple weeks ago, and I haven't been able to get my Wii to accept it since. So
Yeah.
if
My old
that
Wii
run does
disc
get
drive doesn't work either. I wonder if it's a common issue.
yeah, it's probably just aging hardware or whatever. If that run does get into SGDQ, I'd probably just have to borrow a Wii from somebody else, which I'm
Well,
sure
they
I could
have
do.
plenty of consoles, like
I guess,
in
yeah.
the back. They actually expect you to use it. They just want you to bring the game. So,
Interesting.
mhm.
Because I remember, I don't know, you weren't around in the days of like SGDQ 19, right? Or were you?
I I was around. That was the only live event since I've been around that was not at actually.
So at SGDQ 19, I think they actually were okay with me using my own using my own Wii setup.
Oh,
And
they're fine with you using your own console. I'm just saying
oh, okay.
they
You said like they expect you to use
yeah,
it
I
versus
think
like
they expect it as long as you bring the game. Like they have it all set up where you can, like in their backstage. They
they
have
don't have a
everything.
problem if you bring your own.
I don't think so. I've
Okay.
always brought my own just in case because I know it works. But
I would probably bring my own just to be on the safe side.
but
As there's
I
no
think
way
part of it, especially for retro hardware, is they use their whole retro tanks and maybe they have like mods, like RGB mods or whatever, so it would have the cleanest quality picture.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. I don't think I necessarily have a problem with running any of those games on a monitor. That's one of the things I've liked about SGDQ 23 and 24. I don't own a monitor or a retro tank, so being able to try out not just my speed games, but really just any of the games I play on those setups, it was definitely an interesting experience. And I do think I do think like if Pack and Roll Remix were to get in, I don't think I'd have a problem with using a monitor and a retro tank
Hmm.
because I played the game on that setting and it feels just like a CRT. I've debated several times over the past few years switching to like a HD setup, but my current setup is just more than adequate enough for me, and I just
Hmm.
haven't been interested in shelling out the cash for all that. So
Yeah, I got a retro
if
tank,
it,
but just for capture. Like I still play on the CRT. I guess casually I could play on my other TV from now on. But for
Mhm.
speedrunning, to me, the retro tank always has like at least 1 frame of delay, and even that's like, no.
Well, it depends on the situation. So like I did a Galaxy 2 run on it just in the practice room at a GDQ 24, and I managed to get like a low 301 any percent time, which isn't amazing, but it's still decent for a no reset. No reset. It was my fourth attempt of the session, but
Oh, okay.
we'll ignore that. But so it's like I can still play decently well, but it's definitely noticeable in things like Bowser throws in SM64, like
Something
that
that
one
you need
that.
a frame. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And I play Mario 1 where you need to do like a bunch of frame perfect inputs. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I still stick with the CRT, but I split it off into the retro tank for cleaner capture. And then if I played anything casual, I have a nice 4K OLED TV and I might just use that and upscale everything and do my casual
I
stuff
know
that way.
GDQ's been trying because at SGDQ 19 I just played on a CRT and it was
Hmm.
perfectly fine.
Yeah,
But I
they're,
know
they're
at
they're phasing that out now. Like, yeah,
yeah, I know
you
they've
can't
been
really.
trying to do that.
We got
It's
the
always
exception for a Mario 1 thing because with Flibbity's tech, he had to use the CRTs and everything. But
mhm.
also GDQ didn't have to worry about any of that, so I guess it was fine. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've had to do all my runs on monitor, and I feel like some of the mistakes I have made might have been like usually I jumped a frame late, and it's like, I wonder, but I don't know.
Well, for a game like Pack and Roll Remix, it doesn't rely too much on like being frame perfect everywhere, aside from like one stage. But even then, I can kind of like worst comes to worst, I could just brute force it by continuously shaking the Wii remote. Um, because there's a glitch in PNRR where if you boost on the same frame you come into contact with like a jump pad or lava, and you can actually enter the boost state, and it can lead to some really crazy like skips on like 4-5. There's some crazy lava boost skips you can do, but if you don't manage to actually get the lava boosts, it can be a pretty massive time sink. So that would be like the one place where like playing on a monitor would maybe give me a bit of a disadvantage. But again, if I needed to, I could just brute force it by just continuously shaking the Wii remote.
The fun joys of Wii games.
And then Rhythm Heaven Fever, if that were to get in, I don't think I'd necessarily be too worried about that one. But again, that one frame may make the difference because that entire game is based on inputting at specific times.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, the windows are at least somewhat generous because I guess the Rhythm Heaven games are supposed to be like beginner rhythm games.
And in the private practice room especially, they have the exact setups that are on stage, so you can get completely adjusted to it.
Do they have like noise canceling headphones and like
they did on stage? I don't think on the practice rooms or anything. You might be able to request it, but I'm not sure.
Because it's like, how would you practice for a blindfolded run? Like, even in the private practice room where it's like a lot quieter, it's like those monitors are not that loud.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've never done anything blindfolded, so I don't know exactly how it works, but
I mean, for me, I've always just used the audio from my CRT, which has been more than adequate enough.
The closest thing I know is for my Nintendo World Championships run at this past one, they gave us all noise canceling headphones on stage. So, but that's all I've got. I don't know how they do anything else with them. But I feel like you have to be able to like request them if you need them for your practice. Like they should provide whatever you need.
Well, I put in my submission notes that I would likely need noise canceling headphones for the run if they were available.
Yeah, they definitely have it for the stage. Like that is no question.
Yeah. Like my plan would be don't like have couch commentators, but don't not be able to hear them and not be able to hear the donation reader.
Because and I can speak from experience, they work. Like you can kind of, if it's loud enough, you can kind of get an idea of what's going on, but you can't make out anything. So
yeah. Because I did a all metals Rhythm Heaven Fever run for one of RGL TV's marathons last fall, and I had a co-commentator, and it wasn't blindfolded aside from Remix 10 because I wanted to end it with a bang. But and having a commentator isn't totally distracting, but it's like you kind of have two different things you want to kind of be listening to. And so I feel like just taking that, and also occasionally I'm going to want to interject with my own commentary. So I feel like just taking that out of the equation entirely would make it so much easier.
Yeah, no.
But again, gotta hope for the best.
Yeah, it would work on stage. Like they have the resources necessary where that would.
I don't know if I'll go to SGDQ if I don't get a run in, but hopefully I will because I always enjoy it.
Yeah, I still need to figure out what I'm doing. I've gotten pretty lucky, so I'm kind of running out of things, but I have a couple of things that I have never been showcased. So that's my goal right now. But
that's one thing I think both of the games I submitted have going is that they've never been. I think Rhythm Heaven Fever has been on like one of their side events. I think it was Unapologetically Black and Fast. I think that's the name.
But yes, I think they changed the name recently, but yes, I know the event you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Rhythm Heaven Fever's been on one of those events, but I don't think a Rhythm Heaven game has ever been like in the main event. And then Pack and Roll Remix has obviously never been seen, so we'll see.
It's coming up.
Yeah. We got like 8 days left for submissions.
Yeah, plenty of time. But
yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what floods in because I think I've noticed the submission process has changed quite a bit since they like upgraded the website and all that, and now submissions are showing up like on the website a lot faster. It's like normally you'd have to wait like in the past you'd have to wait like a half a day to a full day for your submissions to show up, but now they're just on there like immediately.
Oh, are they? Yeah, I know it's always been a little while, so I didn't know that changed.
Yeah,
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, there's now an entirely separate website for submissions rather than it just being on the main.
Yeah, I knew about the new website. I just didn't know if they loaded everything faster or not. So that's interesting.
The only thing I find annoying is that for availability, they have the days of the week, and they have like each hour, and you have to if you have just open availability, you have to manually select every single hour.
Oh.
That
Hmm.
was fun when I did my submissions.
Well then, I guess that's
It
something.
was worth it because open availability, always gives you a decent chance of getting in. But
Hmm.
again, we just have to.
Yep. Yeah, they've been doing good work. So the past events have been very full of bangers. So
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to see what happens.
yep.
Is there any other questions you have?
Not directly. I mean, have we gone over everything you've done?
Trying to
Do you think?
think. Let me bring up my speedrun.com profile, because I mean, like, there's other games. Like I've mentioned, I'm into like the Gradius series and Namco games, but I don't really know how much of that is like tangential enough to speedrunning.
Mm-hmm.
See if there's anything
Yeah.
here.
The thing I care about most is that you talked about everything you wanted to talk about. So you can
Yeah,
kind of judge that
I mean,
decision.
yeah, I think as far as speedrunning goes, that's kind of all I got.
Fair
Um,
enough. Yeah. I mean, we did cover quite a bit. So
yeah.
if you're happy, I'm happy. I would ask like any or current future plans in terms of speedrunning or anything related.
So right now I'm kind of torn between three different things, and because I can't decide, I just haven't done anything. Pack and Roll Remix any percent for 21, because that is long overdue. The world record in that category is like over 3.5 years old. It's like now it's over 2.5 years old at this point, but I need that. It's a long overdue thing. But then there's also Iron Mario,
Mm-hmm.
because dang it, I need a completion of that. And then Star Revenge 6 120 star, because my PB in that is still not totally reflective of my skill level. But as I said, that category is very brutal to run, so who knows how long that'll be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then beyond that, I still want to improve in Galaxy 2. I think I'd be capable of a 257 in any percent, without not even necessarily without like implementing that many new strats, just playing more consistently. Um, and then there's also the other SMG2 categories like 242 star, which I've never really cared about as much, but I would like a better PB in 242 star, because my current one is absolutely not reflective of my skill level. Like I could probably drop that by at least 10 minutes, if not 15 minutes, and get into like the low 9OX range. Um, it's like, if it's not like a multi-game or multi-category run, I usually don't like speedruns that are long. I don't like doing speedruns that would be longer than like 3 or 4 hours, but it also depends on the game. And that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the reasons why I don't really like doing 242 star all that much, because I basically have to set aside an entire day to do it. And if I don't finish the run, then it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do for the rest of the day?
Yeah. You see, I focus on
So,
everything that's like under an hour, so I
yeah.
don't worry about that kind of stuff.
And then I'm probably going to be, I'm doing a Super Mario Star Road 80 star for RGLTV's Retrothon Marathon next month.
Mm.
So I'm probably going to be derusting Star Road, and maybe I can actually get a decent 130 star PB,
Hmm.
because again, that category is just so hard to do consistently. I'm actually pretty content with my 80 star PB, even though it has like atrocious moments of lag throughout.
Mm.
Yeah, just kind of, those are kind of like my main speedrunning plans, and then beyond that, just continue making Rhythm Heaven custom remixes.
Fair enough.
And maybe not be lazy on writing, even though I've been telling myself that for like 3 years, and I still don't.
Yeah.
I don't have an audience to hold myself accountable, so I just if I'm left to my own devices, I just get lazy and just don't get any work done in that regard.
Me too. I've been sitting on a lot of stuff, so
Yeah. I I'm like in the process of like revising a bunch of my older stories in my series to kind of make it a more cohesive, like give it a more cohesive timeline and narrative. And it's like I've got all the ideas, I've got the structure down. It's just actually writing words on a page. Because what tends to happen is I open up the document and then I get sidetracked and I
hmm
get nothing done.
that's me. But like ideas of like video scripts and stuff. So
There are some videos that I would like to make, but I'm not a great video editor, and I don't want to commission anyone to do it.
Yeah,
So
that's the problem. Editing is very hard.
it is. It real like even just as something as simple as like the segmented demos in Pack and Roll Remix that I was telling you about, the ideal runs. Those like splicing those together, like it's not exactly the hardest thing ever, especially if you're like me and you choose not to be terribly picky about it, but just I use DaVinci Resolve, and for some reason, it makes my PC run at the speed of molasses.
Hmm. That's most editing softwares, so.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figure. But who knows? Maybe I'll suck it up and just deal with it at some point.
Well, we all hope for the best for ourselves, I guess. Gotta get off the
Sometimes
ass
the
and
only
get
thing,
shit done.
sometimes the only thing standing in our ways is ourselves.
Oh yeah, no, I'm fully aware of what's in my way. It's just hard to get over it. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's relatable to a lot of people, so I try not to get too upset about it because that just
Mm-hmm.
causes more issues. But
Yeah, we're all our worst. We're all our own worst critics.
so true.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember I actually watched the your GDQ run, that online run. I now remember because Jay got the record during that run, right?
Yeah, yeah, he did. So kind of interesting about that. So like again, I wasn't really looking at the Discord or the chat, or I wasn't paying attention to any of the other racers or the commentary. I did peek in the Galaxy Discord at like one point, like an hour and 27 minutes, I think, into the run.
Hmm.
And someone had like briefly mentioned that Jay was on record pace, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But also we're like halfway into the run, so who knows how that's gonna turn out. And then after I finished, I like immediately just like went back to the stream. So I went back to the stream just to kind of see where I placed, and I was third, which I totally expected. I expected Jay and Hardcore to absolutely crush me. They're so much better at the game than I was. And then I saw that Jay had like clutched out the world record. I'm like, wow, I didn't think that would happen.
And then
And I
everyone
actually
did pretty
saw.
well for their skill level that race.
Mhm.
It's
I was very proud of Claire, especially because even back as far as like 2019, I had always had envisioned like her doing like a 242 star run at a GDQ event, which who knows if a 242 star at a GDQ will ever happen.
that's a
But
bit
we can all.
much, yeah. I don't know.
I mean, they had like a Final Fantasy 9-hour run at HDQ 2020, so
Yeah,
you know
but I
it's
also feel like
possible.
they kind of stopped doing ridiculously
Mhm.
long stuff like that. That was like a late 2010s GDQ type deal.
Yeah, there would need to be like a really good reason for them to do something like that. I feel like.
I
But
guess they used to have a lot of RPGs, finales or
like
whatnot.
I just wanted Claire to have like a mainline GDQ appearance, so I was proud of her for coming. Hardcore getting a sub 3 was also crazy. I was pretty proud of my own performance, because I basically got every strat I wanted to first try. I was on really good pace for most of the run. The only major time losses I had were things I could very easily brush off, and I didn't really make any mistakes greater than like I only had like 2 mistakes that were bigger than like 15 seconds.
Hmm.
So I was very content with that. And I actually saw someone in the chat. I didn't pay. I saw in the chat replay someone said after the run that like I looked salty, and I wanted to address that. I think I addressed that in one of the comments where I actually like wasn't salty at all. I wasn't jealous of any of the other runners. I totally expected the outcome that, aside from Jay getting record, I totally expected the outcome that came about. The reason I looked that way is because autism means my facial expressions don't always match my actual emotion,
Mm.
and I was stressed. I was like incredibly stressed out because of all the extra pressure I was kind of putting on myself. I feel like,
Yeah.
which
People hark
really
too much
wasn't
on
cool.
that kind of stuff anyway. Like,
Mm.
I don't know. Who cares what someone looks like? You're making an assumption regardless. Like, why we
Yeah,
even
but I've
whatever.
but I've looked through I've looked at the comments on that run, and I've been very pleased with what I've seen. Like a lot of people, yeah, you've got a lot of people praising Jay for the record, but I've been very pleased with a lot of people saying that like what I find real, what they found real, what a lot of people seem to really like about that race is like, aside from me and Hardcore doing the same route, pretty much every runner did different routes and really different strats just all throughout the run,
Hmm.
and a lot of people commented on how interesting that was to watch, and I think that's I think that's what's gonna let that race, I feel like, stand the test of time. Is, and one of the reasons why I'm perfectly fine with letting that be my GDQ PB is, you know, I played consistently. I got all the strats I wanted to, and it's part of a race, so you can compare what I do to a bunch of other runners and kind of see like, okay, what strats are better and how and like what would I feel more comfortable learning? And I think it would be a great resource for people.
Hmm. Yeah, that
And
race was
Roxon
good because again,
and
everyone
Roxon's
played to
bike
their
is
skill level
really good.
very well. Yeah,
Yeah.
so definitely a highlight. I think that well, I mean, it's a highlight because there was a record regardless, but yeah, I mean, even if you don't focus on that, yeah, everyone did very well. So,
And it was also it also served as a very nice follow up to the four-way Galaxy One race that was at the previous AGDQ, because that race was extremely close. Like
oh, wow.
Jay and Tibbs both got 2:19s, which at the time was like an insane time for a race, and they were both within 14 seconds of each other, and there were multiple lead changes throughout the entire race. It was a really good race to watch. So I would definitely recommend both of those races to anybody who wants to watch Galaxy at GDQ.
Mhm. Now I'll have to go back and
I'm
see that
still
one.
holding out hope that maybe I'm holding out hope that maybe someday they'll let us do a like 3D Mario relay race, but
Ooh, yeah.
that, that probably won't ever hapen
I don't think there's been a
unless it's
huge
like,
Mario relay since the like 2D Warpless from like 2017. It's
yeah,
been a while. I've really wanted to
yeah,
see something like that again.
yeah. I feel like a 540, which is the 246 plus Odyssey and 3D World.
Hmm.
I think that's it. I feel like that would take way too long. That would be like 10 hours.
Oh yeah, no.
And a 246 would be like a good if you had top runners all in the 246, it would be like 7.5 hours, which is like 80, but also it would be a nightmare to set up
Yeah.
because you have multiple different consoles, and also Galaxy One and Galaxy Two are both in 16:9, whereas 64 and Sunshine are 4:3. So you'd have to work around that.
Yeah, that sounds
And
too long for
mhm,
yeah, I don't
the
know.
only thing I could really see would be like Sandbox Mario any percent, which is 64 Sunshine and Odyssey.
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
that's only like 3 hours.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, it's a shame the Galaxy games are so long. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think 120 star for either of the Galaxy games could be in a GDQ at some point, because they seem okay. They can tolerate like 6 hour runs or 5 to 6 hour runs.
Yeah, just not a
Uh,
lot of them.
a lot of people have wanted Green Stars to be at Galaxy 2 Green Stars to be at a GDQ, which I'm not a particularly big fan of Green Stars, but I could definitely see the appeal.
Hmm.
And I think Green Stars does have a lot of really fun strats. I think would be nice to show off in a setting like that.
Well, there will be plenty of GDQs in the future, so who knows?
Yep,
All
definitely.
right, well, it sounds like we've kind of reached a conclusion then.
Yep, I'd say I feel pretty satisfied.
All right, sounds good. Well, I guess we can call it a day then. Feel free to self-promote anything you do, however you want.
Yeah, so I mean, you see all my socials down below on the stream layout. I'm also on Wattpad, where I would post like progress on my stories if I actually did make progress on them, because it's a combination of laziness and also some writer's block, but mostly just laziness. Um, I make Rhythm Heaven custom remixes on YouTube that I promote there. I mostly use the Rhythm Heaven remix editor, but I also use Heaven's. I've gotten into Heaven Studio. I might use that every now and then. I upload a lot of like Gradius One credit clears and like Namco long plays of my compilations, just for the sake of showing them off. My YouTube channel is kind of just meant it's I'm not much of a content creator, and it's more so just like a dumping ground of like Twitch archive, like Twitch highlights, like speed runs, high scores, and run one credit clears basically, and then occasionally other stuff. So, but if any of that interests you, or just like random things in games that I feel like I want to just show off on my channel, if any of that interests you, definitely check me out. I don't really have any sort of consistent streaming schedule, but if you find me on Twitch, I'll usually be doing like Mario or Pack and Roll Remix or Gradius or something like that. Rarely it'll be Rhythm Heaven, but probably not that much. And yeah, I mean, if you want to follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky, that's an option. But I I don't really post a whole lot on there either, except for just like updates or just random things in general.
All right. Well, sounds like that's everything. So we will
Yeah.
call it a day. Yep.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always like talking about. I just like talking about these kinds of things, and it's my first time ever being on a podcast, so it was a very good opportunity for me.
Cool. Well, happy to have you. So
All
yeah,
right.
thanks everyone for watching. You want to keep watching the show, watch it live on Twitch, watch the VODs on YouTube. You know the drill. That's really it. I'll log off now. All right. Bye everyone.